Welcome to this webinar, parenting webinar entitled Who Am I? Helping Children with Identity. I'm glad to have Brian Sutter with me here. And we're going to just kind of have a back and forth as we walk through this content, Brian.
Yeah,
Looking
looking forward
forward
to it.
to, yeah, looking forward to this. This is a hot topic. Um, Identity is something that's been around as long as man has been around. But just as things go, words catch meaning and they kind of drift, concepts kind of drift in certain
hmm
eras, and we
hmm
maybe wake up to maybe significance that otherwise don't. And I would say the last 10 or 15 years, the identity has kind of drifted in a way that has come on our radar, and we see it in many different applications in today with our children. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, for sure. It does seem like one of those that's kind of been highlighted and then for good reason, which I think is helpful, but also sometimes when we haven't thought about it or dug through it a little bit, it's pretty vague in our mind and to think a little bit more deeply about what makes up identity, what do we mean by that today, and those sorts of things can be pretty helpful when it does kind of get highlighted.
Yeah. So sometimes we say, identity is key, right? And so really this webinar is really to help bring some clarity to that,
Yeah.
so that we can kind of see it for what it is. Our objective here is parenting what matters in identity development. And there's a number of things even in this statement that I would like a little dialogue on, Brian, and that is um, this concept of development, identity
Mm.
development. That's the way we phrased it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's a nature about identity that is in progress. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about this concept of identity. It's not a destination or that we arrive, but to really be able to see it as something that is always kind of ebbing and flowing. It's always something that is moving. And that should, I think, be exciting to us as parents because it gives us opportunity to see no matter where our identity is, or in this context, our child's identity is that we can influence and we can help it move in the direction that we're hopeful for because it is something that's kind of an ongoing process.
And I think knowing that it's in motion, as you explained it, kind of tells us what our job is, and that is to guide the motion or to help that process. Just as directing a vehicle can
hmm
be done when it's in motion, but cannot be done when it's static, when it's
Yeah,
stationary. So
yeah, yeah.
same type of thing with identity here.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, which again, I think it provoked, hopefully kind of paints a picture of hope. And like you said, like how do I come alongside and see that as something that I can participate in?
Yeah. Now, we mentioned in the line here, parenting what matters. I want to pause on that bold part, what matters. And I just want to kind of set this concept up that this is going to be a little bit of what this webinar is about, trying to put our finger on what matters. And I would like to posit this idea, Brian, and that is um, figuring out what matters is kind of the difference between a mediocre carpenter from an excellent
Mm.
carpenter. They
Oh,
know
sure.
what matters. And a
Yeah.
mediocre, perhaps, counselor to an
hmm
excellent counselor,
Sure.
they know what matters. When
hmm
an expert knows what matters, when a doctor knows what matters, it makes them really good at diagnosis, and it makes them
Yeah.
really good at treatment because they know
hmm
what matters.
hmm
And could we say parenting works along those same veins?
Certainly, I would say yes. I think that would be the case, and not that we'll get it right all the time or that we'll be an expert in it, but certainly that if we can have this perspective, that if I can view identity as something that really is important, and if I can pop the hood to the concept and kind of see underneath, what are some of the things that feed into identity, and how can we help move identity? What even is identity? And really identifying those key few things to zero in on, I think that can give us some good direction because it can be such a broad or abstract concept to have a few things that to really zero in, and it can be quite helpful.
So this is where we're going to path through the content a little bit here on today. It's going to look like this. We're going to pause and talk about what identity is because we haven't really defined it yet.
Hmm.
And so let's pause there, Brian. Identify what it is, what identity is. Then, why does identity matter? Why is it so significant? And then third, where does identity reside? Now, the key there, again, building off of this, what matters, is often knowing where to find something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when a financial advisor knows what matters, they know what questions to ask because they know how to get there. They know where the issue resides.
Mm-hmm.
When a doctor knows what matters, they know where to look, what to put under inspection. And that's what we want to do here today with identity. And then finally, number four, how can a parent positively affect a child's identity development?
Mm.
Um, and so some practical things are also some things that we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go ahead and jump right into to this, Brian, in terms of what is identity.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I've got a definition there, the sense of knowing who I am, and
Hmm.
that in itself is pretty hard to get your arms around as well. It's pretty abstract. Identity is, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I think in many ways, at first blush, we can look at that and say, wait a second, like that seems fairly simple. But when we are asked to tell others about ourselves, sometimes that is a very hard question to answer. Okay, what are they looking for, and what do I share? And particularly as we kind of think about that same question with our kids or our young people, that can get very tricky for them to answer, and not having a good sense of who am I, what makes up me as a person, as well as even the layer below that of like, okay, where does my value come from? Do I have value as an individual? Those are really big pieces that we're talking about when we're talking about the concept of identity in our children.
And one of the questions that was put forward from a participant was talking about ages here.
Mm.
Um, I would guess this conversation changes with the age of our kids.
Hmm.
Is there an age too young or an age too old? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't see that there's an age too young or too old as much as just to see that that part of that development will be that the things that they identify as important to them, or the things that they zero in on as far as who they are gonna change as they age. But we want to be speaking into identity and what their view of themselves is, and what we're hopeful for, and our view of themselves as they move through the lifespan. I think would be really key. While the topics and the questions may change, the underlying foundation of identity is going to be there across the board.
And so I think that makes our ears perk up a little bit, regardless of where our kids are at and how old they are. There is something meaningful to do. That's what I'm hearing. There's
Hmm.
something meaningful as for us as parents to help this process, this development along.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And at a very high level, I think what a gift we can give our kids if they can have just a general sense of what their strengths are, what their interests are, and what their weaknesses are. And again, for some kids that might be pretty intuitive, or they might be able to articulate that pretty well. But for many, that won't be. And then the layer below that is, okay, what's the meaning that I put to that? What's the meaning that I put to this, that I have this strength or this weakness or this desire? Those would be kind of at a high level some of the things we want to be speaking
So
into.
for you to even bring that up, I'm guessing those three things do filter into a person's identity. These are some of the building blocks that a young person is using to look at themselves. I'm strong at
Yes.
this, I'm weak at this,
Yep.
I have a desire for that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a
Exactly.
parent, being aware of those things as well.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Okay, I think that's helpful as we think about what identity is, this concept of knowing who I am, and then for what purpose, why does identity matter? We've got three things down here.
Mm-hmm.
Identity provides a grounding, self-worth, and belonging.
Yeah.
Maybe take each of those and expand them a bit.
Yeah. I mean, the first one here, grounding, I think it just gives a sense of direction, particularly in a day and age where personhood is so undefined and there's so many options. That can be very overwhelming, particularly for children. And so I see identity and some framework of identity as being very grounding. If you're going on a trip for somewhere, if you don't know where you're at to start with and you don't know where you're headed, it's nearly impossible to do that trip. So it's grounding in the sense that it gives us a sense of where to start from. What is personhood? What does it mean to be a person? Where does value come from? Which kind of takes us into that second piece, and that is
Can I
self-worth.
interject right now though, Brian,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to further talk about that grounding term, because I think a word that we all connect with our kids is insecurity, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Think of our young people with insecurities, and that in a
Mm-hmm.
sense is speaking to grounding, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm picturing a person who's trying to stand up on an inner tube on the water, and they just don't have much grounding. They don't have security, right?
Yeah, right,
And
right.
the whole thing gets upset pretty quickly. And we see that in our kids in many ways as well. So this concept of identity is a little is grounding in the sense of security, maybe.
Right. And I think it comes back to what I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that if we can have a good sense of, you know what, I'm actually good at this and I can know that and step into it, that can be really grounding. Or I'm not good at this and that I can know that and accept that. Doesn't mean that I don't work on it or pursue growth in that area, but it's grounding. I don't have to hide this anymore. Whether it's a strength or a weakness, I can say, okay, you know what? Actually, God's really gifted me in the area of academics, the area of maybe athletics is an area there's a weakness. That just can be part of who I am. That can be grounding. It doesn't have to be something that shakes, my value or my worth or the opportunity to build relationships or do various things. It can just be part of who I am and okay.
Sure,
Hmm.
sure. So let's talk about the self-worth part.
Yeah, and then the self-worth part really kind of is the foundational piece of identity and thinking about and helping our children think about where worth comes from. And this is going to be true for all of us that our natural conclusions about where worth comes from are not going to be accurate. Our natural conclusions almost always come from a place of achievement or accomplishment or what other people think. And we want to be able to say, no, a sense of identity, a sense of being personhood, being a created being from a creator who said, I have worth and value, really grounds and gives worth to an individual, no matter what they're able to accomplish or not accomplish.
Brian, I think suicide is
Mm,
more on our mind and in our reality than perhaps what it was 25 years ago in
mm-hmm,
the United States among young people, right? We see that
right.
trend,
Mm-hmm,
and I would have to believe that there is a worth part,
mm-hmm,
hence an identity part,
mm-hmm.
that unwinding in a young person's life that would lead them to that tragic end. Is that I'm very using broad brushes here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that certainly is a role, is a factor there that when that starts to unravel and we feel like we're not measuring up or there's not any value or worth, then kind of what is the purpose and point? And therefore sometimes that feels like the viable option out. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I look at this picture right here. We've
yeah.
got a Letterman's jacket, right, which I think
Hmm.
embodies all of these things at some level, right?
Yeah, right.
This person is finds some self-worth because of achievement, and they've earned their letter.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
there is a grounding on saying, who am I? I am. These are my colors, and this is my school, and I am a part of this. And there's some belonging there too, right? Of all of that, right? To say, this is where I fit.
Mhm.
I am
Mhm.
not aimless but I fit someplace. So speak to that grounding
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. The belonging part is, yeah, I mean, I think it is. in my mind, part of how God's created us, that we want to belong to something. We want to find a place that's like, okay, this is this works, or this is fits for me. And it is so something that it can be so settling when we feel like we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we all are looking for that, I think. And for our young folks to be able, for us to be aware that that's a big part that they're searching for, and that we want to try to help um, validate that, as well as kind of speak into where are they trying to belonging, or where do they have a sense of belonging, and that's really going to shape their identity and play into that. And sometimes that can be very helpful, and sometimes it's not. But being able to see that as one of the big factors that plays into identity, so that we can speak into it.
I would like to identify kind of two dimensions, or maybe two uh, complementary, or you might say competing ideas in self-worth and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Because self-worth is individual in a sense,
Yeah.
and belonging is community in a sense. How
Yeah.
do you have belonging without fitting into a larger mass, right? A larger
Right. Right.
group. And so
Uh-huh.
there is a group aspect, and we're going to speak to some of this later in the presentation, but
Right.
just want to call that out. There's a group aspect, and then there's a very
Right.
individual aspect, isn't there?
There is, and I think for us to be able to see both pieces of that, and to be able to know at different times we're going to be speaking into different parts, or a child's going to be investigating in different levels. Like, am I okay individually, or how do I belong to this group? And I think one thing that in my mind is helpful to distinguish them is belonging is different than fitting in. Fitting in is just like kind of just being part and kind of camouflaged into the group. And in one sense, we want that. But in another sense, we also want to be known individually within that group, and that they're really paired together. We want to be able to be somewhat unique, and who we are individually to be celebrated, but we also want to fit into a larger group. And but both of those things are going on at once, but at different times, different parts of it will be highlighted.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about your identity and identity being stolen, it's all those unique things about us. It's my numbers, right? It's all of these types of things which are unique to me.
Hmm.
And so there is a uniqueness that identity offers, which is very appealing.
Right.
And then there's this a part of something, or a blending in. So yeah,
Yes.
it's it's both of those things. So mom and
Yeah.
dad, we can be always wrong on this with our kids, right? I guess one
Yeah.
more issue for us to always be getting it
Yeah.
wrong, right? But
Uh-huh.
yeah, tricky.
Yeah. It is. It is.
Okay, so let's look at now at where it resides. Okay, so
Mm.
if we know what matters, and we can go to where identity resides, and we're gonna zero in on this affirmation.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we further break that down into three places, three different ways to think about affirmation. Um, Brian, what do we mean by affirmation? What are we talking
Yeah.
about here
Yeah.
by
And I
affirmation?
think so. To be clear here, where does identity reside? In many ways, it resides in affirmation. The things that are affirmed, the things that we're giving emotional support to, whether it's verbally or in our nonverbal responses, that are saying, this is good, or I agree with this. Affirmation is a big part of where identity resides. And what is affirmed is a huge question for us to consider. What is it that I'm saying yes to, or what am I saying is very important to me and should be very important to them, while also recognizing, and we'll get into this a little bit later, that there's lots of different folks affirming different things.
Mhm.
And we get to be one of those voices, but we want to be in that, be really careful and specific about what we are affirming, because there's so many things that we can be affirming, and then accidentally in that, not affirming other things.
So you're really keying in on that first point about what it is that I am affirming. Give us some categories for some things that parents typically affirm.
Yeah. So it might be things like athletics. That would be something like, okay, we want to affirm or pour in a lot of time and energy into that. Or it might be academics, and that's the thing that's really important, or career, or stuff like, and again, most parents wouldn't verbally say this is what's most important to me, but by the way that we talk about vehicles, or the way that we, talk about what other people have, the stuff that they have, we might be affirming those sorts of things, or certain friendships, or political views, or maybe the way they dress, and all of these sorts of things would be, so the topics are endless that we can or can't affirm about them.
And so that then I think leads to that second point of why it is affirmed. It really follows pretty quickly on what it is that we're affirming,
Hmm.
because we have different reasons for all of those categories that you just shared on
Right.
why we would affirm such and such. So I
Uh-huh.
want you to tease out the difference between a kind of a high road reason for affirmation and maybe a low road reason for affirmation
Yeah. Yeah.
that we fall
Yeah.
into as parents.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty easy to just, we see something that's appealing to us because of our identity, and we affirm it because it makes sense to us, or we appreciate that, or it aligns with our interest, or aligns with our strengths, and we don't it doesn't even cross our mind that we're affirming it. And I think they are going to do that too, our children. The low road, or kind of the deeper route, is to be able to, in our own minds, be asking, what is the purpose here, or what is the inherent message that I'm giving by saying this, and thinking a little bit deeper. Not that it's bad to affirm that they have this really nice vehicle, or that you're doing a great job in athletics. It's not bad to affirm that, to do that, but then also to think a little bit different, like, why am I affirming? And maybe then also to move that discussion with that child into, what, the reason why I see this as a good thing, or what I'm thinking about in the sense of celebrating this with you is, and then that can take us into that road of, it makes me think of God, our creator, and that he's knit you together in your mother's womb. And I see him planting within you this gift or this capability, and affirming this leads me to think about God and worshiping him. um, and then too, on the flip side, we can start to help them explore that. Hey, so you told your friend, I'm thinking of a young child here. Let's say you told your friend that you have a cell phone when you don't. What were you looking for? Well, I was hoping that they would affirm me. They aren't going to use that language, but they're going to be my friend. They're going to like me because I have that cell phone. Oh, that's interesting. So you think that them thinking you have something is going to make them think better of you. So your goal, your purpose is really to build friendship, but you're going about it in a way. Do you think that's actually going to help build friendship? And again, starting to help them think through internally, what is it that is affirming to them, or what they're affirming, and why they're affirming it, and if that actually makes sense as they're thinking through building their own identity.
I think those are helpful examples that to flesh this out a little bit. And as I am musing on it as well, I can all too quickly see where sometimes I affirm my kids for my own advantages.
Right.
It would be easier if my kid made this decision or was
Right.
this type of person.
Yep.
Therefore, I'm going to affirm that. I'm not sure if I think it quite like that, but
Right.
whether it's the way they dress or whether it's the way they, um,
Uh-huh.
you know, their
Yes.
attendance at certain things, right?
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, these reflect themselves upon me, so I can find myself affirming certain behavior. When
Right.
at the end of the day, that affirmation is really more about me than it is about them.
Yes.
You are kind of causing us to think a little bit about that, where and why we affirm.
Yeah, I think a really simple example. Let's say you're a family sitting around the table, and you've got two high schoolers, and one of them is talking about their excitement about computers, and you have no interest in computers, and the other one is talking about their interest in farming, and that's where your passion lies. You're going to be naturally affirming to the child who's talking about farming and not meaning to, but you're going to be then also saying, you're not as important, or I'm not as interested in that, which will feel like for them, I don't matter. And then that could speak into their identity. And instead, we want to be able to say, oh, wait, actually, I want to affirm this interest in farming, but I also, even though this isn't an interest of mine, how do I affirm this thing over here that isn't an interest of mine?
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Mm.
And the messages that we send by the reasons why we affirm what we are affirming, and then going to that third point, who is doing the affirming is really critical in this space of identity, isn't it?
Oh man, yeah. And one of the things that's exciting but also a bit scary is that everybody, there's so many different individuals and groups are affirming our own identities as well as our kids'. So the exciting news is that we get a seat at the table. We get one of the seats, but I think that means we really want to purposefully make sure we take that seat, because the culture and their peers and all of the other people in their lives are also going to be affirming different things, and that may or may not align with what we are um, wanting to affirm.
It's a huge blow to a parent, and I'm going to speak as one who kind of knows this space, to come to the realization that that 11-year-old in their class has as much power over them in affirmation than their father does,
Right, right.
right? And it makes absolutely no sense to me on
Yeah.
why my kid would adjust themselves based on what that 11-year-old thinks, you know?
Right, right.
Um, but the point remains, where of affirmation comes from is a tricky thing,
Oh yeah.
and it matters.
hmm it is. And I think in that same vein, then it's also helpful that generally speaking, I think there's different cultures and different areas, and even within different churches and within each family of things that tend to be affirmed. And if we can be aware of that, then that can help us say, oh, wait, you know what? This local culture might be really quick to affirm this thing. Okay, and knowing that then helps us know what we might want to be careful with, or how we might want to approach that particular topic, or we might know what 11-year-old boys might be quick to affirm, and oh, how do we have that in the back of our minds, and so that we can again take our seat at the table and just not feel like we're at the mercy, but we're helping our children be aware of what are the voices saying around you, what are they saying is important, and is that really what's most important?
So what I hear you saying here, Brian, is being a discerning parent or a thoughtful parent, knowing that my child is going to seek affirmation, and they will likely find affirmation from some place and from some
hmm
voices.
hmm
Who is that person?
Yeah.
Um, and this is really gets to the issue of friends and knowing friend groups, but it could be an influential teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a Sunday school teacher, and just to be aware
Yeah.
of who is able to affirm, who has some of the seats at the table. You said it well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that would be important to acknowledge about that too, that generally speaking, being able to impact our children's hearts is going to start by having an environment of safety. If they can feel emotionally safe, that they're going to feel heard and they can share, that's going to be helpful then for us to be able to speak into what's going on. But our tendency as parents, certainly mine, is to provide ongoing instruction and ongoing correction, and then we're never actually affirming, we're just um, saying no, and of course there's a place for that, we want to do that, but also like, what does it look like to have some safety that I can hear their hearts, affirm the things that I think are wise and good, and then maybe hold off on the instruction or correction for another time, or just making sure that's not the only thing that I'm
Yeah.
providing.
Well, let's move along then, because what we want to do is talk about positively affecting identity development. That's our charge as parents. That said,
Hmm.
okay, we can positively affect. Dare I say we can negatively affect?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to be left with that alternative as well.
Sure.
Kind of previously we mentioned if we're affirming the wrong things or have the wrong motives or all of these types of things, right? So what
Hmm.
does it look like to positively affect identity development? We're going to break this down into two concepts, Brian. One is understanding how identity is formed. So there is a formation, there is a route, there is a map whereby an individual comes to a settled identity. And so there's some wherewithal. I want you to address that. And then
Hmm.
number two, we're going to look into that group and individual identity piece and kind of see that for more than what it is. So um, let's go now to identity formation.
Hmm.
We've got 4 identity statuses on this matrix in front of
Hmm.
us
Yeah.
with some kind of heavy words. So we want to kind of understand those, Brian.
Okay.
So at a high level, bring us into this chart and explain it. Start with the exploration. We see that on the left-hand side.
Yep.
On
Yep.
the y-axis, we've got exploration, high and low, and commitment. Maybe tease those two terms out. Help us see how they relate to one another.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think to start with exploration, and again, on either of these, you can be high or low, and it's not a stuck space, but you're kind of either high or low or anywhere in between on lots of different topics. So exploration is really when we move into investigating. We're trying to figure out what is it that is important to me? What is it that I think about this certain thing? What is it that I value? So it's exploring, trying to figure those things out. Where do I stand on this particular topic? That's the exploration. It's going to involve whether that's research or talking to different people with different opinions, exploring. And if you're in exploration, that would be high. High exploration is when you're investigating and trying to figure out what you think, what you believe, or where you stand on a particular topic.
Now, let me just interject a little bit about what I know about um, child adolescent development and
Hmm.
education and brain. And that is at young ages, they are not able to critically think.
Right.
I think classical educators would call that the didactic stage.
Mm.
They're really good with on off, true false, and
Yep.
black and white.
Yep.
And I've seen this in my kids at these young ages, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yep.
I don't know, you can play with some ages here.
Right.
Very didactic, very, very right and wrong here. So that's got to confront us a little bit, right? When it
Hmm.
comes to
Hmm.
formation here.
Yep. And so I think that's a good point that particularly younger kids are going to be in a state of low exploration just because they don't have the capability. They're going to be soaking up information, but that's going to be from the sources they're around. So they're going to be taking in a lot of information, but then that information they take in is going to land them in a conclusion, but they really don't have the capacity to explore other possibilities or other ideas. It's just downloaded to them, and that's going to automatically put them in more of a low exploration state.
I think that's helpful, Brian, because that I think guides us a little bit on our roles as a parent. That if I've got a young child,
Hmm.
maybe I'm not urging exploration. They're not at that level. I'm not asking them to critically think about the news and about
Right.
the issues, right?
Right.
And maybe I spell it out to them as best I think, but at
Uh-huh.
least giving them facts, giving them the practice, allowing them just download.
Yeah.
They're really in a download state in those young ages.
Yeah.
But just to be aware of myself, I know my I know my kid right now um, believes X, Y, and Z is wrong.
Right.
That's the way I've taught them.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they've tried it out and own it for themselves. That's going to be yet to
Right.
be determined.
Right. Yeah. It makes me even just think of my daughter last year when she was in school. So she would have been She would have been 8 or 9 at this point. And she came home and couldn't believe that one of her friends in school didn't believe in Jesus. Like she didn't even realize that was a category that was possible. And then that begins the exploration a little bit, but still at that point she doesn't have the capacity to do that. Um, but she's starting to be introduced to, oh, there's other ideas, there are other possibilities. And as she moves forward and as she grows and is exposed to more, then that's gonna kind of come on board.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
like that. Let's
Yeah.
go to that commitment part now, Brian.
So the commitment part is after you've done exploration, then that allows you then to move into high commitment. So commitment is saying, okay, this is where I land. This is the conclusion that I stand on. This is where what I believe and what I think, at least for now. And so it's kind of coming to resolve, this is where I'm at individually on this particular topic. And so you'll notice that through exploration, that's going to move you into, the goal would be into higher commitment. Once you've explored a topic more thoroughly, then you're going to move into a higher level of commitment on where you stand personally on that topic.
So taking that example of your daughter with Jesus,
Hmm.
right now she's probably low exploration,
Yep.
um, but high commitment.
Right. Exactly.
But you're not, as she grows, you don't hope that she stays here.
Right. My hope would be that over time, she'll move from low exploration into high exploration, but then that's going to shift her into low commitment. When you move into exploration, then you automatically move lower on the continuum of commitment
Hmm.
because you're kind of reevaluating. So then your commitment is lower, and that can be really scary. That can be scary, particularly for Christian parents when the topic of where does my child land is so scary. There's so this happens on every topic of identity, not just faith, but this would be one that obviously would be central for believing parents. And it's scary for us to sit down and as they're going through that exploration, and boy, Johnny says this, and my teacher over here says this, or as they move into college, my professor thinks this, or I read this book over here, or did you know the internet? There's all, all of these things out there, and that leads them into that what's called identity crisis or identity moratorium is the technical term, where there's I don't know where I stand now and I'm exploring all these things, but hopefully through that exploration and helping put around them solid resources that can help guide them, then that exploration moves them into high commitment after high exploration, and then that's the identity achievement that really is where we hope to land. And it's not that we stay there, because we almost always we go through a challenging thing, and that makes us reevaluate. And so this all of this is in a constant state of flux. Um, yeah.
But this really gives a map, doesn't it?
Hmm.
It gives a map for how we want to see our young people to move,
Yeah.
and it helps me understand my present better, Brian. It helps
Hmm.
me understand my young teenagers who are right here in many ways and in many
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
And it gives me a little bit of a wherewithal to say, they're going to have to come here to land in this achievement place.
Right.
And this happens on 1,000 issues, doesn't it?
Right. Exactly.
So
Yes.
this
Yep.
isn't just like where your kid is at. We can be all over the map depending on where we're at.
Yeah. So you might be an identity achievement in regards to faith, but you might be an identity for closure when it comes to your view on how nice of a car you need.
Hmm.
Um, and again, so it comes from things that are pretty unimportant to very important. The topics can range extensively. Um,
That's really helpful. And,
and I think
and
too,
yeah, go ahead.
well, another thing that I would just point out here is this identity diffusion is a really easy place, particularly for young people or adolescents to fall in this, where there's low commitment, low exploration, they just don't care. And so in that space, I think a lot of parents can feel that way, especially around important topics for adolescents, teens, young adults. It's like, I can't even get the discussion started because they just don't care at all. And so I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. That's quite normal. And in that space, what we're trying to do is like push them towards a little bit of exploration, like, have you thought about, or where do you stand on this issue? And just kind of asking questions, trying to prime the pump. And they might say, don't know, don't care, and that's fine. We leave it alone. But we can see that as our goal is, boy, how do I help them move into exploration just a little bit? Are there questions or things that I might do that might help them move there, or even with a commitment level?
I wonder too, if sometimes a young person stays here
Hmm.
because they don't see the value
Right.
in being here on a particular issue.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I'm just going to throw out a sacred cow,
Sure.
like politics, for example,
Sure. Right.
right?
Hmm.
They know where mom and dad are right here,
Yep.
and take your topic, right? And
Yeah.
and so anyway, just
Yeah,
an observation.
exactly. No, I think that's a really good point. And so in that topic, what you might think about is, let's say they're annoyed with something locally that you see as tied to local government. And you might say, oh yeah, you're annoyed that this road is blocked and it's been blocked all year. I mean, where do you think that comes from? Or what do you think's tied into why that would be? And then that might lead them into discussion and like realizing, oh wait, you mean that referendum that was voted on last fall actually does have an impact on daily life. Yeah.
Yeah, and then choose so many other topics, and I think even going back to grounding, self-worth,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
um, belonging.
Yes.
I mean, to really grab a hold of those. So let's just take another one, right?
Yeah.
Church commitment,
Mm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
As we raise our kids, and that's one too where we can low exploration, low commitment,
Right.
and sometimes they can just sit pretty there.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I just
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And okay. And this map, I think, gives us a little bit of what we want to help move them towards as far as exploration or commitment. And that might fuel like, oh, what kind of questions or what kind of information might help generate that. I think too, maybe this, I could see this being a question too, that sometimes identity foreclosure might even be on like, let's say a big topic like self-worth, like um, I am unloved or nobody cares about me. And let's say they have high commitment towards that view of themselves, but low exploration. Oh, so you don't think anybody cares about you? In asking questions about that, trying to move them into exploration around, well, Johnny just called you yesterday, and I wonder why he would call you if he didn't care about you at all. Well, Johnny, I guess he cares, but nobody else does. And again,
mm,
to be able to that's generating exploration, and an exploration might help them reconsider the conclusion they've come to and the commitment to that conclusion, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
it
Yeah.
does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really helpful. And I think these quadrants are helpful because it gives us a little bit of a chart on maybe
Hmm.
how to urge and guide, which is really what this webinar is all about. Let's move now to group and individual identity. Okay, now there's a
Hmm.
fair amount of content on this slide. I'm aware of that, and for our participants, you might be, we're racing through this matrix here. But let's take a little bit at a time here. First, we've got group identity and individual identity. Again, say a little bit about that, how those are both present.
Yep. So again, I think like we talked about briefly before, to just know that this is competing in our own hearts as well as our kids' hearts all the time, that they're simultaneously wanting to be a part of a group, but also have some degree of individually being unique and who they are as an individual. And I think at a larger cultural level, our culture tends to value identity from an individual standpoint, like know who you are and be authentic to yourself, whereas other cultures are a little bit more group focused. And I think they're always at play, but different cultures and different settings, both like in the U.S. versus, you know, in particular locations within the U.S., that there would be certainly variation in that.
I think that's really fascinating. And let me just a little bit of an aside now. If somebody has a question, you can feel free to chat it in. Feel free to even unmute yourself. With 15 minutes to the top of the hour, and there's a lot here, and we've said a lot when we want this time to be productive for you. So don't feel bad about jumping in and even interrupting if you want. Let's take a look at this, Brian.
Hmm.
I think that's fascinating. We in America and maybe the West tend toward individual identity. And what we've done here is we've got kind of some nuances. Where does identity come from? So what does it look like for it to be group identified, looking at the group and identifying your role, as
Mm.
opposed to by looking into oneself and identifying one's desires. I mean, those are very different, aren't they?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And it's so fascinating if we can help our kids see when they're maybe looking to or being ruled by one or the other.
Yeah,
Like, so, you're doing, let's say you wanna wear this shirt. Okay, why is that? Why is it? Well, because it feels right, or I really like it. Oh, okay, interesting. And then you go to school and you see three other people. Oh, it looks like there's a lot of other people there going on too. So what do you think that's about? Well, these are my friends, and there's and helping them say, oh, so it's not just that this is what you prefer. It also is what other people prefer. And so sometimes what they would say, this is no, this is just about what I think, what I feel. There's also a group piece playing into that. When it is an individual desire or a group desire, then to kind of move below that of, oh, is that really what we want to motivate us?
yeah.
Yeah.
You take the next one. What does success look like, for
Hmm.
example?
Yeah.
Fulfilling one role. Look how straightforward this is.
Yeah.
Fulfilling one's role. Look how convoluted this is.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
here's the thing that I've experienced with my own children and doing some teaching in the public schools and at the community college. Um, this is a very mature, like that's a very high standard. Like, how do you figure that out? Where this is
Right.
very straightforward.
Hmm.
But just to
Hmm.
understand that the difficulty that is really thrust upon them.
Right, definitely. Which I think kind of reminds me back to the grounding piece. If, by living according to one's authentic self, it is a really hard task to be grounded when you're totally reliant on looking within yourself, figuring out what you want, and then being totally committed to that. Boy, that's a tall order. Um, Whereas the other, yeah, gives you some structure to work from, so that might be pretty settled. But then having a sense of value and worth as a person, that might be more challenging in that realm.
Yeah. I and as we move down these, you can see how finding achievement, right? Achievement is on living up to the role in the group, whereas
Hmm.
individual, it's living up to your own desires,
Hmm.
self-expression.
Hmm.
What is it required of self? I find this to be, look at how different these are.
Yep.
Self-sacrifice. It's fitting into the group. It's living up to my role. It's doing what I'm supposed to do,
Hmm.
as opposed to self-assertion. A lot of
Yeah.
conflict going on within us, but they're both very, very real.
Yep. Definitely. And I think too, one of the things I would just say about this is this gives us a map to think about how identity is formed and kind of the different goals in identity formation, depending on if we're looking at it from a group identity versus an individual identity. And then this gives us a window into questions to ask our kids and help them to think about the motive behind what they're doing or to think about their thinking. And if they can develop that skill, that's going to give them move them down the road a long ways of being able to have a coherent worldview.
Yeah. Another thing I think that's helpful too, Brian, is to understand the maturity required. Group identity is much accessible, much easier, much quicker than individual identity.
Mm,
And there is a maturing process that a person needs to experience to really have that individual. I mean, you just have to have a lot of life experience in order to know
mhm.
yourself, right?
Right.
To live up to your dreams, for example. And here's what I see. I do see young people like deer in the headlights look, because they want the job that fulfills their individual identity. And it's really hard to find an entry-level job that does that according to their
Right.
rubric, if this
Right.
is their rubric. However,
Right.
it can be achieved if they have more of a group identity, right?
Yeah.
Being a clerk or at Walmart, for example, can have terrific group identity if you view it like that.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
if you only have an individual identity, difficult place to get to. And what's the number one question that everybody asks a high schooler? What are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do
Right.
when you get out? And
Right.
to understand that going through their heads is this.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's difficult.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. No, it is. And I think too gives us an opportunity then to speak into that and helping them see from us that we value you no matter what you end up doing, and that there's a way to be valued, not based on what you do individually, but by just where you fit in or where you belong, and there's a space that we value you here. We care about you. We're interested in you, both what's unique about you, but also that there's a place for you in this group, whether it's one that's got a lot of status around it or not.
Yeah. I want to pause. We've got one more slide, and we're going to kind of finish the story with a Christ-centered identity, which I think is going to provide a little bit of a map to say, ooh, how can I come along with my child as they go through group and individual identity and guide them in a Christ identity? But I want to offer a chance for questions. Maybe there would be a question at this point. Would be glad for that. If anybody wants to care to unmic, you can, or chat it in, that's fine as well. I'm going to ask Brian a loaded question while you think about that question. So Brian, is it okay for me to look at my kids and say, all right, but you're a Kaufman? And this is it okay for us to build identity around these things that we know aren't, you know, I have
Yeah.
no idea what the answer to this question is, but that happens a lot.
Yeah.
We want them to find a place in that. And so we say, no, well,
Right.
that's the other, the suitors do that, I know, but you
Right.
are a
Right.
Kaufman.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be what I would say there is just it's important to recognize that that's a reality. That in general, there are, you know, labels or expectations that are put on you because you're a Kaufman or because you're a suitor or because you go to church in Central Illinois or, Ohio or like that there are kind of general, this is what that means. And for us just to be aware that that's there, and that may either be a helpful grounding thing or it may be pressure that we don't mean it to be. So one, I would say, is just to be aware that that's a reality. And then two, where we can, to allow them to be free to explore other things. So for example, suitors are not musical. We are, I'm the guy that can't even, do it. It's just a disaster. I can't even explain it. But it's okay if my daughter, who does right now, wants to do piano lessons. For them to know that even though suitors don't do music, if you want to explore that, I'm willing to allow that to be a possibility. I just won't be able to be very helpful. So yeah,
And what I hear then is that identity is it buoys them up or supports them in something larger. It is not capturing them as much
right,
as it's meant to help them flourish. And so when when that identity does that, help them flourish, then perhaps there's good reason there.
Yeah.
Let's go now to that Christ-centered identity, which I think is really exciting. We're going to just take
Hmm.
these again and just step them through. And there's a
Yeah.
refreshing narrative,
Yeah.
Brian, that's going to speak to their hearts
Mm.
because identity does.
Yeah. 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 It is. I think when you compare these, as I read through them, like the Christian identity, just like I can feel myself letting out a deep sigh and just relaxing, like, oh, okay, huh. And part of that, I think, is because it's something that's received, whereas the others are achieved. That
Yeah,
there's something that is just like, oh, I can just sit down and receive this rather than having to accomplish this through, you know, doing what I have to do.
yeah. I wonder if that's even part of the answer, and which I want you to address. So we just had a chat in question,
Sure.
Brian. Let me read it. You can I don't you could read it too. How do we as parents help our kids look at their identity in the midst of a major life transition when
Mm.
even we as parents are not rooted in belonging in a group identity yet? Great question.
Oh
Let me
man.
just say, I'll say the easy part and leave the harder for you. Transition does key up identity crisis, doesn't it?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's a great question. I'm glad I can't see it, so I don't know who sent it in, but I think it's such a great question, and one that I'd wanted to mention. But I think part of this goal of helping our kids with identity would help them learn how to walk through loss, because transitions are always going to bring loss, and with loss or with transition, there's always going to be a transition in our identity. And so helping them be able to walk through that, I think, is very, very important. And seeing, therefore, there are parts of their identity that will eventually move from the foreground to the background to prepare them for that. Um, so,
And
yeah,
yeah, I really like that, Brian. And I wonder too, not all identity markers are equal.
yeah,
So if there's 100 things that make up my identity, I'm a teacher, for example, it
right.
means something to me.
Mm-hmm,
I introduce myself as that. I am a husband. I
mm-hmm,
am a father. I'm right. And all of these have different proportions of making up my whole.
mm-hmm,
Um, and and um, and as parents, as we example that transition, boy, what a moment in time in transition to have those proportions at a healthy level.
yep, yep,
That
yep,
right now I used to call myself a carpenter and I'm not at the moment.
yep,
And so that's going to take a back seat. But what is still in force?
right. Mm-hmm, yep. And that's where I think too, as they go through a transition, for us to be able to connect with their sadness, to connect with the reality that that's painful for them, whether or not we think it should be or not. Because the transitions they experience, at 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, are going to have different weights, at least in our mind. But to be able to connect with the reality that those are painful, and then to help them navigate why is that painful for them, not in a like challenging way, but in a way like I want to understand and I want to connect, so that they can move into more of a settled, group or individual identity.
So I hear what you're saying is it's an opportune moment to actually learn about what matters for our
Right.
kids in that moment and to seize upon
Hmm.
that. Brian, we're right at the top of the hour,
Okay.
and I don't want to go long with this. People have got things to do. There is on the web, we're going to have these slides in a downloadable fashion. So if you wanted to take another look at these, you will be able to find them on our website. Brian, thank you very much.
My privilege. And I would say too, like for anybody, if this stirs up questions or you'd like to kind of talk through it more specifically into a specific situation, you're always welcome to call the office. Be glad to touch base and think through anything that's a little bit more specific. So, but it's been a pleasure to be with you. It's helpful to think through.
Thank you. Thank you each one for being on.